When teachers label you as lazy and a dropkick, regardless of whether that is the truth or not, it doesn't really matter because this label antagonizes the student. They no longer feel like they are cared about in the school system. They are judged every time they walk into a classroom because they are embarrassed in front of every single person when they are reprimanded for cheating. All of these things will never work for a conducive learning environment, and that is why we regret the culture of punishment of cheating. First of all, a bit of characterization before I set out my points. The first one is, what does this culture actually look like? This looks like suspensions or auto fails, detentions, whenever you cheat or are caught for cheating on a test. But more than this, what is the most detrimental to a person's health or the student's health is when they are reprimanded and embarrassed in front of every single one of the students in their class. They are called out during the test. That can be really harmful. No, thank you. So why does this culture actually exist? So the problem is with cheating is that Ned will probably come out and say that what cheating does is it hurts the people at the top because because people who cheat are being unfair to the people at the top because they have worked so hard, and therefore the reprimand is needed. The problem with this is that it pits students against each other and makes it more of a competitive environment that they feel like they need to bring other students down to do well in class. And that is no thank you. So last thing on characterization, what do we support in this debate on the counterfactual? The first thing we support is that the kids are able to resit the test in the occasion of they are caught cheating. The second thing they are allowed, no thank you, is that they are allowed help from the teacher. So the teacher provides them help because they cheated and because they know that they aren't doing so well with the content. And the third thing that we support is that the teachers are completely discreet when they do this. That means no parents. That means no reprimanding in front of every single student. They go up to the student quietly, no thank you, and they help them. On to the first point of what is the actual problem in this debate. Before I go on, I'll take a POI if you have one.
So when parents get told that their child is cheating in school, doesn't that create a better incentive for those parents and teachers to communicate about why that child is teaching, rather than trying to avoid involving parents in the conversation altogether?
Yeah, so the problem is that when teachers go straight to parents for help, it is more a conversation between the teachers and the parents rather than the student. The student is the person that misses out the most in these occasions, therefore they should be included in the discussion. And the person that is going to help them the most in this situation is not necessarily the parents, it's the teacher, because they don't need mental support, they just need learning support, and that comes from the teacher. So first question, what is the problem in this debate? So we set up these types of students that cheat, people that have no faith in their ability and have to resort to cheating. This can also be people who just aren't motivated to study, or don't have the proper resources to study, or are disadvantaged, come from broken homes and don't have the resources to study. All of these types of students then feel like they have to resort to cheating as a way to get by in the school system. But note here that students won't necessarily get better marks than the people who have studied all their life. No thank you, but we'll address this a bit later. Therefore, we set out cheating as not the problem, but a symptom of the problem that is really at hand. The problem that is really at hand is that these students are disadvantaged. No thank you. They are falling through the gaps of the school standards. They are falling through the gaps of the school system, and instead of helping them, they are being antagonized and brought down further. Now, before we go on, Ned will likely set up that it is unfair to the top students that people who cheat are able to get better marks than what they probably should. At best, this is trivial compared to the problem which is really at hand, which is the disadvantaged students brought down by the system. But at worst, no thank you, it is just completely untrue. It's not the brightest that gets to the top of the class because they study the most. It is the most privileged that gets to the top of the class because they are able to access the right resources. On to this second point of why we regret the culture, and because it worsens the problem that I just talked about. So note that kids that cheat can't engage with the school standards, they can't engage with the school system because they are constantly being brought down and can never feel like they can fully achieve the top. So this culture just makes them more disengaged to what was there before, and it makes them feel like their ability is even worse. Why? First of all, it antagonizes there's antagonism from authority. This means they are less likely to go to a teacher when they feel like they need help because they think the teacher sees them as a bad student or as a dropkick. There is so much pressure from the teachers because this culture of, calling people out when they cheat just makes them not want to go to the teacher anymore. But secondly, it just, all of these, yeah, sorry now.
Why is it mutually exclusive to support disadvantaged kids while making kind of exceptions that this cheating is dishonest, sorry.
Okay, first of all, a major problem that disadvantaged kids have is not anything else in the school system. We see the main problem for disadvantaged kids is that they have a lack of resources. This means, and this enables them to cheat more because they feel like they need to get up. Under your side, you are pressurizing them not only into cheating because you don't provide the resources, but you then antagonize them further and don't actually allow them to have the resources. On this second point, the second reason why this culture is worse is that it takes kids out of school for longer. This is because you give them more detentions or you take them out of school for more. But thirdly, auto fails are super bad because it locks them out of more opportunities than we are actually trying to achieve in this debate. On this third point of why our counterfactual is better. So you'll recall what I said at the beginning, that we aid students to overcome this. So why is this better for students? One, because they feel like the school standards, the teacher, and every authority in the school is invested in them. They have faith. They're not seen as dropkicks, and they have the right resources to carry on and learn better. But why does this improve the schooling? Note what I said at the beginning of the characterization about how kids are pitted against each other due to this competition. So this will equal less pitting against each other, less of the message that, that kids who cheat are fundamentally wrong in what they are doing. Why? Because the kids at the top do not feel like they have to win at the expense of another. And this creates a culture of collaboration rather than competition. Speaker, at the end of this debate, it is clear that the disadvantaged students do not need to be reprimanded, they need to be helped. So proud to propose.
It was evident in the closing lines of the first affirmative speaker that these students need to be helped rather than reprimanded, that they didn't look into what this cheating process actually looks like. Note that it's not just figuring out how these students cheated and what they can do in order to prevent it, in order to punish them or make their mark worse. It's actually an investigation into not only how but why they cheated, what led them up to that moment when they cheated. And that was important in this debate because it meant that these teachers were able to figure out what's going in these children's lives. It meant that they could figure out the external pressures and the stresses that might be on this student, and that was important if they ever wanted to improve their well-being. I'm going to look at two questions in this speech. Firstly, why cheating is inherently bad, and second, how we make a better education system. But first, a few points on setup. Three things here. Firstly, what does the cheating look like? Second, what do the kids look like? And last, what does the actual culture of punishing look like? On cheating, we know that it's more than just suspensions and auto fails like they wanted to champion on the affirmative. It's actual things like taking these students out of classrooms, looking at why they cheated, that investigation process. But we'd also point you to other forms of cheating, such as plagiarism, in cases where the person whose work that was submitted didn't actually consent to that work being followed through. Second, what do these kids actually look like? Not only these kids that the affirmative wanted to push that have just made mistakes or are lazy in their progress at school, but also the kids who are actually desperate to teach, those kids who might be working multiple jobs outside of school, and those are the kids who we really need to help. Furthermore, it could be something to do with an unresolved learning disorder. It could be something to do with a kid with dyslexia who hasn't realised up until now why he's struggling in their tests. We know that there's a principal distinction between those kids who are just lazy and those kids who actually might need help. Either way, we give them learning support or support outside of school. Lastly, what does the culture of punishment look like? It's not just the blatant punishment, but it's more the expectation of these kids being punished. That means that the teachers don't undermine their own authority when they go to punish these kids in other classrooms, not in front of their parents. But it was also important because it meant that it was mutually exclusive, having constructive, positive conversations with this child rather than just undermining their own authority in the school. But lastly, what did the punishment aim to promote in the school, which was something the first affirmative speaker again missed? It's promoting a sense of shame around the aspect of cheating, but on the flip side of that, it's also promoting positive values such as honesty, such as integrity, all values that will be helpful in the long run for this child. Before I look on why cheating is inherently bad, I'll take a point.
What incentives does a child with dyslexia have to go to their teacher to get help if they've been embarrassed or failed or punished for just trying to do their best?
Presumably, if this child with dyslexia, his only alternative is to cheat, once he's cheated, once he's caught, then the teacher can intervene. That's the problem in this debate, is that these children, in most scenarios, aren't able to come forward, and that's where the teachers can intervene to help them. So let's look at why it's inherently bad. 4 reasons here. Firstly, because it undermines the system and authority. We have rules in life, and an act of cheating is actively undermining those rules. But secondly, because it becomes a race to the bottom. The comparative that they're offering is then encouraging the students who can cheat the best, who can put in the most effort to skirting the rules, who can do it in that way. But thirdly, it creates a very unequal playing field, and that was something that the Affirmative quickly traded off. They said most of the time it's these people from privileged backgrounds who get good results. We know that we're not actually undermining their success, their actual results, but we're undermining the effort they put in to achieve those results. That could also look like your average student who works really hard, who has a higher moral compass, who doesn't want to resort to cheating, is then getting actively disadvantaged because of other students putting in less effort skirting the rules. But fourthly, on plagiarism, we know the people whose work that they've worked hard for, they're not consenting to that work being destroyed. They're not consenting to their reputation being actively harmed. That was something we were never willing to stand by on our side of the house. But why is this principle all important? Because firstly, it's damaging to the child's reputation and his progress through school. But secondly, because then cheating becomes better than honesty, and it creates a sense of entitlement that entitlement around the problem that students shouldn't have available to. We note that, thirdly, succeeding in school comes with its advantages. So if you want to exceed by illegal means, then that actively disadvantages those students who are going through the system normally. But fourthly, because it actively further disadvantages the students who don't have the resources there available to help them cheat. That could look like the privileged kids not able to cheat and get better results than the other kids. Let's look at how we make a better education system. The Affirmative point out that being called out amongst your friends is embarrassing. 2 responses to this. Firstly, in most of the scenarios, it's the subtle act of taking the student into another classroom. But even if that isn't the case, secondly, that's for a reason, because shame is the incentive for students not to cheat in the future. So then their point came contingent on proving that cheating is inherently good, that cheating and those harmful qualities are actively better than honesty and integrity. They then said that students just need learning support and not the punishment from cheating. But the only way these students can get learning support is if the teachers recognise that there's a problem in their academics. There's a reason why they couldn't answer that question in the normal manner. That's when these teachers intervene. And then they said that cheating was a symptom of the problem rather than the actual problem at hand. But no, the only way to recognise the symptoms is to actually recognise the problem. Recognise what caused it and recognise how we can fix it. Before I move on, yes.
The reason kids still cheat with a culture of punishing them is because the fear of failing is bigger than the fear of being punished. How does punishing them actually deter them from cheating in the first place?
Well, note that cheating doesn't always result in an order fail or the fear that you want to promote of getting a 0. It actually comes from a system of worrying about failing others, and in most scenarios, the teachers will actually talk to students to figure out what's happening there. Let's look at how we actually help the kids in this scenario, because we stepped out how this investigation process actually works. That can look like these kids either learning the material or combating a particular problem they're having outside of school. We note that we abolish arrogance in the school system because they're not cheating for the sake of cheating. They're either working towards a goal that's well defined and that they can achieve. But we'd also avoid further consequences in later life of cheating in your final Year 12 exams or cheating in university when the consequences are more severe. We note this can even lead to things in later life such as tax evasion at a worst case scenario. But we note that we also improve multi-party relationships between the teachers between the parents and the teachers, because the teachers act as a moderator for the parents to talk to the child, and that can avoid many conflicts that arise in the school system today. For all these reasons, so proud to oppose.
Look, maintaining honesty and integrity for the sake of upholding a meritocratic school system would probably be a point for them if that school system existed. But come on, panel, come on, audience, The extent to which the school system is so unmeritocratic at the status quo, the point at which privileged students literally are advantaged tenfold over disprivileged students, I would say that meritocracy is not the priority in this debate. I say that we should help students that are disadvantaged, that are doing what they can to get by, and I'm going to prove to you in this speech why it is mutually exclusive, as Avia did in the second substantive point of her case through the tone deafness of the negative team. I'm going to prove three things. Firstly, I'm going to deal quickly with their principal claims and why there's no moral compass to be considered here. Secondly, I'm going to deal with what happens to struggling students under either counterfactual. And then thirdly, I'm going to work a bit in substantive and tell you about why this culture has and continues to stifle creative pathways to success. So, on the principal claims, the first claim they bring us is that the consent of authors of academic papers is violated when students plagiarise. Look, firstly, the only harm they attach to this is reputations being violated. I don't think a second year uni student taking a paragraph out of your academic paper or essay is going to violate your reputation within the academic community. Moreover, when we model in resits and rewrites, that pretty much rectifies all plagiarism in real terms, in terms of that piece of work being considered as one's original work. It just means that we don't fail students for doing that. We just let them resit it. We help them work towards getting better grades. I would argue that that is a more conducive way to handle that plagiarism. I don't think their consent material really is that powerful in this debate, given that. The second claim they give us on this principled standard of morality is that students who cheat, they just dish out a bunch of claims here and there about having a higher moral compass, honesty and integrity, and entitlement at the hands of students who cheat necessarily being morally worse than students who are hardworking or meritocratous. First of all, I've already kind of outlined to you why it's not necessarily a matter of merit. Avia stepped through why it's often not the brightest or most competent students that succeed, but students who are the most privileged, who have access to tutors, who don't come from broken homes, who feel motivated because their parents have always told them they can succeed, because their parents went to tertiary education facilities. All of those barriers mean that this idea of merit and hard working to get where you want to go doesn't stand up. But moreover, that mentality, that messaging that you have a higher standard of integrity and honesty and moral compass, if you are a privileged student that doesn't cheat, that works hard, that is literally the exact narrative which disengages the most vulnerable students in this debate. It makes those highly achieving students super arrogant, and they stand on a high horse over kids that cheat to get by. And I would argue that that pits students against one another, because it means that the top dog of the school thinks that you cheating on a test comes at the expense of their unviolated success. I would say that just because I pass a test and cheat, that shouldn't take away from the success of another student who passes a test and doesn't cheat. And I think that the narrative perpetuated by the culture of punishing students for cheating necessarily pits students against each other and makes that so much worse. I don't think you're immoral if you cheat. I think you're doing what you can, sure.
When students cheat with no teacher intervention, they continue a habit they think they can sustain. Will this give them a competitive advantage in the workforce?
Look, that's not the comparative, right? Because under either side, when students cheat, there is some sort of intervention there. You have to stand by, your burden in this debate is to stand by punishing students. It is to stand by failing disadvantaged students. It is to stand by calling the parents of kids in broken homes who cheat because they literally are so unmotivated and have no energy to study. That's your burden in this debate. We tell you that you can still recognise the point of divergence, whatever that's meant to mean, and still help students to succeed. It just means that you don't fail them and you don't punish them. You are still able to recognise that in all those ways. That kind of leads me on to the second topic in this, or thing in this speech, which is around struggling students under either side. They give you this first claim that telling parents as part of a culture of punishment is the only way that you can have more discussions and help these kids. Firstly, that was tone deaf to our material at Avia about how parents are often the problem and home life is often the problem to those students' failure, and how telling parents and punishing students by that way, note that that is a mechanism of punishment under their side. Under our side, you are more likely to get the altruistic discussion with parents in terms of how can we broadly help your child succeed when you are not calling them to be like, your child cheated, we failed them. Have a discussion with them about not being entitled to marks that they didn't work for. That is a very different discussion under either side. We would argue that ours is more nuanced and productive. The second claim they give you is that like support is not mutually exclusive from labelling cheating as dishonest. Look, it's pretty obvious why it is, because when you label a student as dishonest, when you punish them, when you tell them that they are immoral and have no integrity, even if you then try to give them help, they're probably not going to engage with that nor be receptive, because that creates an antagonism from their authority figures, from their teachers. It allows them to be ostracised from the best students that could otherwise help them or sit next to them in class, or be placed by teachers next to them without necessarily telling them that that student cheated. I think that there are a lot of things that help students to succeed, including just a conducive learning environment where they don't feel judged, that are mutually exclusive to our side. Moreover, if you want to push mutual exclusivity, then the only difference between our side and your side is that we can both help students, but you punish them also. I'm not sure why that's a plus for you. In substantive, I'm going to quickly outline why this culture has and continues to stifle creative routes to success. Look, if you are cheating, the bottom line is at least you are doing something, right? Because the alternative to cheating is just realising that you can't succeed, realising that you can't pass, and just not doing anything, or writing funny answers on your test, or just literally not engaging with school at all. I think that cheating is actually pretty impressive if you can get away with it. I think that, I think that branding it as cheating and necessarily perpetuating a culture of punishment is somehow derogatory to the actual skills you need to cheat. I think collusion, I think collaboration, I think making friendships and having interpersonal skills with the students around you and working really hard to achieve on a test and telling each other answers and collaborating like that. I think that if you are someone that cannot succeed conventionally, I think that's a pretty important skill to have. What does a culture of punishment, or has it done historically to these students? Well, it means that it cloaks this in a wrongness, in a tabooness, that means that students are less likely to cheat and more likely to just give up altogether. I think that's a harm in and of itself. But secondly, it messages that it is better to give up creative solutions to a problem if you cannot succeed conventionally. What's our counterfactual to this? Students are helped to succeed conventionally when it is identified that they are cheating, but they are not shamed for doing so creatively, i.e. by cheating. They are allowed to build skills that are going to help them later in life. Because if you're dyslexic and you can't study and cheating is how you pass, I think it's pretty darn good for you to build that skill early in life and not be shamed for it, especially if it means you can still get help to succeed conventionally. That's why we stand proudly on prom.
We weren't saying that students who didn't cheat had an inherently superior moral compass and that this was a debate about white kids being inherently better than kids who struggled in class. What we were saying was that school does not exist in a vacuum, and that parents like raising children with the values of fairy tales and stories. They like having kids who are honest, because it's really hard to raise kids who lie to you all the time. They like having kids who don't cheat or steal, because it makes it incredibly difficult to parent. That meant that there were some kids who intrinsically felt shame when they cheated, irrespective of whether or not they were punished. That meant that the comparative wasn't between a kid getting 100% because he had a private tutor and a kid having to fail and therefore feeling the need to cheat. The comparative was between two average kids, probably in similar circumstances, one of whom felt incredibly guilty when they cheated and so didn't, and therefore didn't get any of the intervention that they wanted to talk to you about, and another kid who did cheat and was then invited to resit the test and be given all of these privileges. That was why it was important that the schools tapped into those values that parents tried to teach and tried to maintain consistency between what they were taught at school and what they were taught at home. A few points in characterization, a question on how cheating affects kids later in life, and then some substantive material on how we improve classroom culture under the status quo. So a couple of things we need to characterize. The first is this question of culture. So they told you that what we had to defend under our side of the debate was automatic fails, it was calling kids out in front of the class. Obviously, we didn't have to do that. What we had to defend on this side of the debate was a culture that if you cheated, you would be punished. That was important because Ben told you that that culture was the thing that protected a teacher's authority when they took a kid who had cheated out of the classroom and had a private conversation with them, which may or may not involve calling parents or trying to get to the root of the problem, while simultaneously everyone else in the class believing to some extent that that child was being reprimanded. We could do things like have kids resit tests. That was fine. We just needed to maintain a culture and an expectation that cheating was bad and that resit was a form of punishment, not a form of reward. It was never mutually exclusive to have kids both be punished for cheating, be told it was bad, be encouraged to be honest, while simultaneously having teachers who were rational, qualified, caring people try and get to the root of these problems. The second thing we needed to clarify in this debate was a characterisation of students, because all of Rana's virtue signalling that she just tried to do for 7 minutes, we totally agree with all of that. Yes, there are disparities in education. Yes, kids who are more, have more privilege are probably less likely to cheat. Although, no, we actually don't think that is true 100% of the time. Often a sense of entitlement that comes with privilege is a thing that drives people to cheat because they think they're above the system. We didn't necessarily think cheating was always a symptom of being poor or disadvantaged. Often it was a symptom of entitlement. That was a nuance in the case that could exist under both sides of the house. But finally, it was important to note that we thought that kids who were driven to cheat out of necessity and kids who were lazy or unmotivated probably needed to both be explored in this debate and not cast aside as Rana was so frivolous to do in her introduction.
Points. What punishment is mellow enough to not affect students' welfare or long-term outcomes, but strong enough to create the deterrent culture that you probably your whole case on?
Depends on the student, right? Like, this just isn't difficult to understand. If a student is being driven to cheat because they are undiagnosed dyslexic, a teacher can figure that out when they look at things like their handwriting and their ability to read out loud in class and can deal with that student appropriately. A student who is driven to cheat because they feel entitled or didn't put in the work, again, can be assessed by the teacher, who can institute a punishment that makes that kid feel embarrassed and guilty and not do it again. Guys, teachers are rational actors who spend a lot of time with their students and know how to deal with them. This wasn't some crazy, binary system. All we had to do on the outside of the house was defend that there was an expectation that cheating was bad and worthy of punishment, regardless of whether or not that child was automatically failed or given a detention. That mattered in this debate. So secondly, how did this culture affect kids later in life? Alright, what did Rana tell you? She told you cheating is impressive if you can get away with it, and that we should be encouraging entrepreneurship in the form of cheating. Okay, so, but then what she did, what she told you was the comparative, was kids just answer things like silly questions on the test, don't engage, don't pay attention. We tell you, and this is critical, that if a teacher has a child who is just not engaged and doesn't care, trying to get parents involved in that, trying to sort that out is really difficult. When you have the taboo-ness or the wrongness that Rana wanted to demonise, that is when you get parents and teachers having a reaction to something. You say, hey, your kid cheated, let's react, let's problem solve, let's figure this out. It's really hard to tell parents your kid isn't paying attention, particularly when those parents, like what they wanted to tell you, are disengaged or absentee or working 3 jobs and can't be there for their kid's education. That's not something you react to. Your kid cheated is something you react to. That is when we increase the party relationships that Ben wanted to tell you about. That was important. This idea also that you can't be you can't work and be collaborative and entrepreneurial if you can't cheat on a maths test. Obviously just absurd. We think that, yes, kids can be really innovative in the ways that they cheat, but often they just write the answers on the back of their hand and then get caught. This wasn't kids coming up with Morse code technology to use in tests.
So even if we agree that in both instances teachers will intervene to some extent, what is the incentive for a student to participate in that intervention when all they are doing is being punished by a teacher?
Again, it depends on the punishment and the student. Again, this is not a binary. Again, you can tell a kid, hey, you did something bad, but let's make sure it doesn't happen again. And actually on that, their whole reset mechanism is entirely dependent on the fact that that kid won't cheat again. That entire process is dependent on the fact that that kid will be told you shouldn't cheat. If you don't involve some level of shame and some level of trying to fix the problem, then you just end up with kids cheating again on their reset. So finally and importantly, how does this improve classroom culture? Out of order. So under the status quo, students trust each other. They are encouraged to help each other, but there are good boundaries in place. What does that look like? That looks like you can have study groups, you can share notes, you can collaborate. What you can't do is copy each other's answers, plagiarize off each other's essays, text each other during assessments. Those were really positive boundaries. The affirmative team tried to tell you that embarrassing kids in front of each other increases competition. I've already explained multiple times that teachers are good actors who wouldn't necessarily do this. In fact, teachers often go out of their way to avoid embarrassment in front of the entire class. But even if that was true, it is still better than the other comparative, which is kids not trusting each other because they think that they're going to be undermined by another person's ability to cheat, but also kids who are really engaged in the education system, kids who do really like their teachers, kids who do really want to work hard, not trusting their teachers to maintain the same standards that their parents maintain. That was really damaging for those students. At the end of the day, kids who trusted each other and the system that the school operated within were more likely to work hard, more likely to succeed. That was important. Because if we wanted to reduce cheating overall, we could still protect students while simultaneously upholding an expectation that honesty should always be valued over the alternative. So proud to negate.
Panel, you're going to hear a lot of things in this speech because I'm going to attempt to respond to both different cases we heard from first and second negative. But beginning with this huge case shift we heard at second negative, the thing that is imperative to point out is that their entire case relied on the fact that teachers earning $65,000 a year with their THR of 60 or above, who are often underpaid, disengaged and don't have many resources, are the hero of the education system, who in a culture that tells them that cheating should automatically be punished, are going to be able to use their best judgment to decide exactly how to cater to every kid's need. Unfortunately, not every teacher is like that. We think that often teachers are quite power hungry and just enjoy flexing power over their students. Or they're hugely pressured by parents who get really angry when they see that another kid in that class has cheated. Or they just buy into this cultural narrative that we're trying to regret, that a child deserves to be punished for cheating, for them to say that, oh yes, we're going to have the expectation that you will be punished, but with this barrier of teachers who can then decide whether or not you are going to be punished is a very fine line to walk, and I'm not entirely sure it fulfills their burden. 3 questions in this speech. Firstly, why we're the only side that can properly benefit and help those children who are really struggling. Secondly, why we shouldn't be aiming towards this perfect schooling system, but if anything they make it worse. And then thirdly, why we think that we should always value trying to some extent over not trying. So firstly, why are we the only side that benefits these really struggling children? At this point, I'm going to engage with the characterisation we heard at first, which was that punishment looks like taking kids into a room and having a D&M with them and talking about their feelings and then helping them in the best possible way. I'm sorry, you had to stand by punishment. You had to stand by doing things like failing them, taking marks off of them, giving them a detention, because you are supporting the status quo, you are supporting the culture that exists at the moment. So even when Isabel then tried to paint it as oh no, it actually works really well, what is the culture at the moment? The culture is you get zeros, you get automatic fails, you get detentions. They had to support that. Stop trying to worm your way out of your own burden. But then, what did we get? Alright. No. Isabel told us that you can feel really guilty for cheating, so therefore 2 kids who are average students, one is more likely to cheat than the other. First thing to say here is how marginal is that? We think that the biggest part of this debate are the kids who would fail if they didn't cheat, or the kids who go home to parents who are super abusive and beat them if they don't get 90s. We think in both cases those kids are the really vulnerable ones we need to be protecting. This kid getting from a 60% to a 65% because they looked over their shoulder and they don't really feel that guilty is super marginal. But let's engage with it anyway, because what are the types of children who feel really guilty? We think that if you feel really guilty and are therefore not likely to cheat, you probably care about the school system, you're engaged in the school system, you're passionate about the school system, you understand that moral conscience. We think the kind of kid who just switches off completely and just has no care for what's going on is the kind of kid who's come from a really disillusioned and disengaged background. We don't think a kid who's had every opportunity then just sits there and goes oh, now I don't care if I'm going to cheat or not. That's just so unlikely. Sure.
The kids you're engaging with, the kids who are abused or disengaged with the system, but you think that teachers are bad or even just imperfect actors, what is your mechanism for helping those kids?
We have already told you this. We think that the reason teachers are bad or imperfect actors is because they buy into a culture that you have to support. If that culture did not exist, and we did not have this knee-jerk response to cheating that was to punish children, we think teachers would be able to be somewhat better actors. We gave you all of those mechanisms at Arvia. Rana repeated them. Please engage with this debate for what it is, which is the culture that exists currently versus a different, better culture. Okay, that's kids feeling guilty. Then we get this idea of family. Teachers are so good because they can bring families in. Kids are really good at knowing when their families are unsafe. The kinds of kids who are unlikely to go to their family because they're really struggling in school are the kinds of kids whose family screams at them, getting their homework until 1 AM in the morning because they have to be getting A+, or the kind of family who does not give a crap about education and doesn't care how their kids are doing. We think that if the student wasn't going to go to that family in the first place and ask their family for help, the teacher has no right to go over their head and involve their family. We think that the kinds of kids who cheat are kids who are terrified of being punished for not getting A+. We think that bringing the family in means that that child is put in a dangerous and hostile situation that does not help them. Again, they're going to try and tell you that, oh, but teachers can make that best judgment. We think the kids are just better at making that judgment because they know their parents and not all teachers are good, and because culturally there is this knee-jerk reaction to just, call up the family, give them a 0, punish them. That is what we're trying to change. No, thank you. And then the final thing that really they tried to push about helping these kids is you can help them later down on the line. We think we stop cheating. We think we're more likely to stop cheating later. Which brings me to what Isabel told me when she was like, your whole debate relies on the fact they're not going to cheat the next time. So does yours. Like the whole culture of punishing relies on the fact that these kids aren't going to punish later, but they still do. It isn't working. Maybe it's time to try something new. And like we think that even if sometimes you will still cheat, you are less likely to if you suddenly feel like you have a teacher you can trust. You've got a teacher who's on your side. You've got a teacher you can go to because you've got a cool teacher who didn't just turn around and punish you for cheating. Alright, no. Next question. Who gets the best school system for everyone? The first thing I'm going to ask us in this question is who do we care about in this debate? Because we told you at Rana,
panel, the point at which the AF wanted to champion resitting tests and having talks with teachers and doing extra study was the point at which they literally made our case for us. Why is this? Because all of these are forms of repercussions for cheating. Many kids would see things like resitting a test as a punishment. So we're basically saying that on our side, we don't have to support all of the current forms of cheating that exist. We just have to support the fact that there should be repercussions for cheating, the fact that there should be some sort of punishment for that cheating. That is fundamentally why we won this debate. But further to this, there are three major issues why we still won. But before I get onto that, just some clarification on the characterisation of teachers. The Affirmative have basically told us that there are all these power-hungry maniacs who want to humiliate students. A few responses to this. Firstly, we'd say that they're actually really rational actors. They've dedicated their lives to helping kids, they've dedicated their lives to wanting the best outcomes for those kids to try and better the education system. Therefore, we would say that they're great actors. But even if that wasn't true, their case relies on the fact that teachers will talk to these students, that teachers will help these students, that teachers will do the right things for these students. Therefore, if they're saying that teachers are bad actors, then they are literally making all of their benefits disappear. Okay, three issues in this debate. One, how we create the best outcomes for students. Two, how we create the best school system. And three, how we actually fix the issues that cheating is a manifestation of. On this first issue, they've basically told us that students are labelled and that means that they're judged and embarrassed and it's not conducive to a good working environment, that things like autofails hold kids back, and that this is really bad for struggling students. Few responses to this. Firstly, we'd say that teachers, again, are rational actors. They're experienced and they're qualified. It's not actually in the teacher's best interest to publicly humiliate children because then, yes, they probably won't do as well. The teacher wouldn't have done their job as well. They'd probably either lose their job or get a bad reputation as a teacher. We think that that is something that a teacher would never want. And the AF have completely mischaracterised this. We'd also say that positive discussions are definitely not mutually exclusive to their side. Our side, we can have those really positive and beneficial discussions with students prior to doing anything. And we think that we can do that while simultaneously promoting things like honesty, like good values, and not condoning cheating, which we think, as we stepped out at first, is just really bad in and of itself. Secondly, we would say that this actually leads to the recognition of issues and can catalyse discussions for those students. Because these discussions come about as a result of that cheating. They come about as a result of the teacher, say, noticing that kid is cheating, noticing that that kid's written something on the back of their hand, and as a result has talked to them in a really meaningful way and tried to engage with them in a meaningful way. We would actually say that this kind of idea of not calling out kids for cheating, not having ramifications for kids cheating is actually really pernicious, especially in the future, because at school is where you learn to do things like writing really good essays without plagiarism, like studying in a really effective and meaningful way that leads to actually good test scores. We think that if cheating is encouraged, not necessarily encouraged, but if cheating faces no ramifications, then what happens is kids just continue to cheat again and again and again because there is no shame and no repercussions that disincentivize those kids from cheating. Therefore, they don't learn their skills and therefore they're not able to be as effective in the future. Second issue, how we create the best school system. They basically told us that teachers are seen as antagonists and kind of that all authority figures are seen as antagonistic and therefore kids are less likely to trust and talk to teachers. Firstly, we would say that teachers already and will remain authoritative. We think that if there is an issue with kids going to teachers, that will still exist because they are still a figure of authority. We think at least we catalyse discussions. Further to this, we have two major reasons why we improve the school system. One from a pastoral care perspective and two on the acquisition of knowledge. But before I move on, I'll take a point.
Cultures are upheld by system. The culture of punishing cheating is propped up by procedures and systems that necessitate automatic fails and suspensions. Do you regret how this culture has harmed already disadvantaged students?
look, we think that those kids are going to be a disadvantage under your system as well because they're still going to face all of the same issues on both sides. At least on our side, they recognise cheating is wrong. They talk to teachers about that cheating. There are then systems in place where they stop cheating, where they start learning skills, where they get support, and where they then succeed in the future. We don't think that that mechanism exists on your side, and therefore we think that we actually benefit those students, which is what I'm going to go on to discuss in this second point. So firstly, from a pastoral care perspective, we think that teachers, one, notice cheating, talk to the kids, and then, without publicly shaming them, we think that a lot of teachers will go to great lengths to make sure that they don't publicly shame those kids. And then they'll take action based on what they hear, based on what they've seen in class, and we think that kind of that culture of punishing students is, as we've said so many times, clearly not mutually exclusive to having those empathetic discussions. We think that that was a gross mischaracterisation, and we think that those kids are always going to be better off on our side. This second issue of how we make school systems better in terms of the acquisition of knowledge. Because if kids are not cheating, then that means they're learning in a more organic and authentic way. That means that they're actually developing those skills. We also think that, secondly, parents are far more likely to collaborate productively. Why is this? Because as we told you at second, it's far easier for a teacher to say to a parent, your kid has cheated on a test, your kid has done something that we see is really bad, rather than just, your kid is disillusioned, your kid is a bit upset with the whole system isn't working that hard. We think that that actually catalyses the discussion with that parent. That parent can then maybe change their own ways. Maybe they're not involved enough in their kid's life, and that actually catalyses that change for that kid. That benefits them in the future. We think that we would always be better off trying to reduce that cheating. And if kids weren't cheating and kids need to trust their teachers anyway. We would say that kids can also still see cheating and will still find it morally wrong, and then that'll lead to them not trusting each other. We think we'll see a race to the bottom, and we think that that's really, really negative. And then we would say that kids who cheat are either going to keep on cheating again and again and again, or kids who don't cheat just become disillusioned and jaded, and we think that's equally bad. Lastly, onto this smaller issue of who actually fixes the issues that cheating is a manifestation of. They basically said that it closes disparity and that cheating can be a form of creative problem solving. A couple of responses to this. Firstly, we agree that there is disparity, but we would rather fix this, as I've said throughout my case, without condoning cheating. And secondly, on this crazy idea of creative problem solving, we would say that parents and teachers are going to get involved, which is really good. We help those students, and that there are other ways to actually benefit yourself creatively. And often cheating isn't all that creative. And students should be able to come up with better, more effective ways of actually doing well, rather than just kind of cheating by writing stuff on the back of their hand. Furthermore, even if they are creative enough to actually come up with a solution, that means that the teachers don't see that cheating, which means that the teachers never actually help those students who need help because of their creative problem solving, which means we just create this pernicious cycle where these kids never actually get help, but maybe are a bit more creative on the ways that they're cheating. In conclusion, we have proven to you throughout our case that we create better outcomes for students, we create better outcomes for school systems as a whole, and we actually fix the issues that exist. That is why I'm so proud to negate, and that is why this motion must move forward.